Yeah. So good afternoon and thank you. Um, in some sense, I'll take over from the previous presentation, but in a way, my presentation is a little different. I would like to talk about employment, crisis of employment in India, but looking at the informal sector and more. My focus would be on how do we study the informal sector. Informal sector is very difficult to study, is the final conclusion, and all of us should make efforts in understanding the informal sector. That would be my focus. But to start with, it's well known, but I just give a background that in India, we have an employment crisis, very low worker population ratios. The worker population ratios for women are even lower. I'll show you a graph in a minute. There are estimates that the worker population ratio is falling in recent years, but even if it's not falling, it's stagnant at quite low levels. There are notable differences across states, and some states, the worker population ratios are really very low. So, mm, so this graph gives us the worker population ratios for male and female workers, urban and rural India. Female workers are in red, and you see urban worker population ratios for female workers is very, very low. In rural areas, it's kind of double of the urban. It's the poor women who are working in agriculture, which takes the worker population ratios of women higher. In urban areas, that opportunity is not there. That keeps it low. Um, for the male workers, also in comparison with other countries, the worker population ratio is quite low. So this is a kind of a background. In India, we don't have enough jobs. There is a crisis of jobs. There is a crisis of good quality jobs, let's say. And so that's the background. And from there, I would like to talk about informal workers, which is a consequence of not having enough good quality jobs. Here, I am presenting 1 year. Sorry, my title is not very good. 1 year, the worker population ratios across different states in India. And so you see there are some states with relatively higher worker population ratios and some states with very low. Yeah, sorry, that it's a mistake. It's 2021. Yeah, the latest year. There are some changes, but yeah, it's for 2021. Now, the states in South India and the states with dominant tribal populations have little higher worker population ratios than states in North India and Northwest India. So that's what this graph shows. So for us as India as a nation, there's so much variation that we'll perhaps have to think differently when it comes to different states. The data on employment in India comes from 2, 3, 4 sources. Very quickly, I would like to mention these sources. We had something called the National Sample Surveys on Employment and Unemployment. These happened every 5 years. The sample was relatively large, spread all over India. And the last of these happened in 2011-12. They were at 5-year interval. There is then the census of India, which happens every decade, which also gives us data on employment. The last one was supposed to be in 2021. We missed it, COVID. Some countries also had it in 2021 and have managed to do it 1 year later. But in India, we don't know when it will happen next. Then the successor of the National Sample Surveys, surveys on employment and unemployment, is something called the Periodic Labor Force Survey. This is supposed to be a continuous survey. Many other countries are also doing it. So we have estimates for every year, but the survey goes on and on. Every quarter, there is a survey all over India. There are small differences in the way the first National Sample Survey was done and the Periodic Labor Force Survey. There are small differences, but more or less comparable. The graphs that I showed you in the beginning, let me go back to them. Yeah. No. So, yeah. So here I have both of them. So if somebody thinks that later the women's participation is going up or so maybe it's because the surveys are different. We'll come to this. Yeah, as Jayati said, I won't go back. Okay. Now, then, when surveys are done, and we are now my focus is going back to employment and informal employment. Surveys are either enterprise surveys or household surveys. And all the surveys that I have mentioned so far, national level secondary sources, are household surveys, where we go into a household and try and get the information about employment of each member of the household. Now, the difficulty of household surveys is, and especially when the employment is informal, getting details of what exactly the workers do is more difficult. When it's formal, organized employment, it's easier. Very often, the respondent is one member of the household, perhaps the head of the household, but it's one member. And that member giving detailed information about everybody's work becomes difficult. And when it is informal employment, when it is multiple employment, it gets even more complicated. So what I'm trying to say is eventually, to understand informal sector, we need smaller surveys, detailed surveys going into the field. And that is what I do. That is what my colleagues at the Society for Social and Economic Research do. And so I would like to present some work that we do. Going back to the problems with secondary data. So, for example, we don't have number of days worked in any large survey in India. We don't have hours of work in any survey in India. We have working, not working, working majority of the time, not working majority of the things like that. But when things are in a flux, and when we have the informal sector where so much is happening, jobs are changed so frequently, the secondary sources of data are not sufficiently good. In recent times, COVID especially, we've moved to, even the government data have moved to telephonic surveys, where the quality of the data are really not reliable. We've been to the government office, where these surveys are done, and we try to understand from them how it was done, because we attempted a telephonic survey and it was very, very difficult. So the quality of recent data are not very good. Women's work is not sufficiently captured, which has been a problem throughout, and it continues to be. And the new jobs that we have, and it's almost all informal sector, the gig economy, all the services, delivery services. Now we have repair services, and most recently in India, we also have men and women, but therapy, massage therapy, mobile. So you carry a bed and you go around giving a massage. Okay. Now, something about definitions I would like to mention, and the definitional thing is about, so there is informal sector, and then there is informal employment, and there is informal employment in the formal sector. And the study that we have been doing for the last 1.5 years, I won't present too many results, but I will just, So the study that we are doing is trying to focus on industrial areas, workers in industrial areas working in regular factories, and how informal their work is, how informal the work contract is. That is what we are focusing on. And so that's what these are not jobs in agriculture, for example, or in the services sector. These are jobs in the formal industrial sector, where informality is increasing. The share of informal sector employment in non-agriculture in India is quite high, but this is non-agriculture, and this is the share of informal employment in the informal sector. This is not the informal employment in the formal sector. We don't really have good estimates of informal employment in the formal sector. Things that we already know: low wages, no job security, lack of other benefits, we already know. What we don't know enough is extreme high rates of occupational hazards, accidents, exposures. That data is really very weak. We have not been able to capture that, but through our surveys, we know that the incidence of accidents, occupational hazards is very high among workers who are informally employed. And it's easy for the employer to get away because of the nature of employment contracts. The living conditions of urban informal workers is also something that has not been focused on, and we are interested. I'll show you some pictures of the areas where we are doing our surveys. Finally, these are full-time, hard-working people. These are not part-time jobs, 12 hours, 14 hours, and still you don't earn enough to live decently, to save a little bit. Most, and when we say migrant workers in India, we are talking about internal migrants. Most migrants have to migrate single, without families, and still they are not able to live a decent life. The field work that I'm talking about is done by colleagues at the Society for Social and Economic Research.
5 minutes.
Yeah. And so I'm just presenting what others have done. It's not only my work. This is the region where the surveys were done. Delhi is in the middle, and the area is just south of Delhi. It's called Faridabad. In Faridabad, we have the industrial area. If you can see the blue areas, they are factories, large factories, industrial area. And the yellowish ones are where we have done our surveys. So workers walk to the place of work. There's no distance. And workers live in really very bad conditions. So this is one of the areas where we have done our surveys. And I'll show you pictures. And there is a drain which flows in the middle of the area, and the conditions are inhuman. And the point that I would like to make is the people living here work in the formal industrial sector, which is next door. They do not earn enough to have decent housing, enough food and stuff, and therefore they have to live like this. And which means we have to go as academics, as researchers, go looking for them and do fieldwork, study their thing. Now, it's about understanding conditions of life and work of informal sector. For us, it's also about building research capacity. We would like students to go where others don't go, where government refuses to go, where other agencies don't go. It's not attractive enough. And finally, one issue that is very important is the lack of organization among the working class. When we do our surveys, there is no trade union, there is no organization. So how do workers organize themselves? What are the challenges? In the informal sector, how does this thing happen? So our research is also, we do it in discussion with the trade unions, get to know what is the things that they are interested in, and see how we can contribute towards organization of workers.
2 minutes.
There is little bit of home-based work where we go. These are women who are members of the household of others who work in the factory sector. Homes are so small that the work has to be done outside. It's not even within the home. We've done surveys in 2018 and 19. And then we did a baseline survey in 2020. Just the day our survey was had to be stopped because of the lockdown. And post the lockdown, we did telephonic survey, and we are not very happy with the telephonic survey, though we managed to talk to quite a few people. Now
you have to give us your results, because you have 1 more minute.
Yeah. So very quickly, I'm giving you some results. And as I said, I don't want to give you all the results. Just want to say that these are difficult surveys which all of us have to do. And the results cannot be presented in 10 minutes, 15 minutes in a conference. So, so the community, the social category of workers that we have surveyed, I'm giving here. Let me jump. Okay, very few workers above 50 years. There is a kind of a burnout. Child workers were less, and in the industrial setting, we think that it's getting less and less. Women workers, some were home-based workers, which I said. Education was very less. 46% of our women workers had no schooling at all. This is urban industrial sector. There's no, and in terms of technical training, there was very little even among men. These are largely internal migrant workers. Bihar, Uttar Pradesh are the two large states which are the sources, and Haryana, where it is another major source of migrant workers. There's only 1% who were non-migrants, who were local from the place. Single migrants without families was very important. 4 to 5 dependents in the place of work, and 1 to 3 dependents in the village. The main industrial sectors were auto components, automobile accessories, textiles, and garments. These were the main sectors. These are regular big factories. We are not talking about small workshops. In terms of operations, finishing operations, stitching, and working on machines was important. These are, meaning we should not get into skilled and unskilled, but the workers learned the job on the machine at the workplace. It's not from technical training. 42% of our sample did not earn the statutory minimum wages. The statutory minimum wages in India are very low. They are already below subsistence, and 42% of our sample workers did not earn minimum wages. This is about the telephonic survey that we did post-COVID. These are workers that we have interviewed before, so we contacted them on telephone. The response rate was only 60%. The response rate for women workers was even lower, because getting a woman respondent on the telephone is more difficult, because the number belongs to a relative, a husband, or somebody who doesn't let her use the phone. Now, our workers went back to their village, which was about 13%, and returned very quickly. And there was a large proportion who continued to work. So we know of India and the lockdown as being very stringent, but 82% of our workers continue to work during the lockdown in the factory sector. There are machines to be maintained.
Yes, I'm really sorry to rush you, but you know, Weijang is waiting, and we're 1.5 hours late.
Okay. So there was a price hike faced by workers, and then the price fell. And so I will not conclude. Okay. Now, so in conclusion, I would like to say, and I think the previous speaker spoke about it, the whole effort at formalization is at the enterprise level. GST, tax, and so on and so forth. And the formalization of working conditions, the formalization, the labor regulations is moving in the opposite direction. So there is something called, meaning now we have online portals where registration happens. So we start declaring that formalization is happening, but this is tokenism. It's taking us nowhere. And in the coming surveys, we'll know hundreds of workers are registered, but it makes no difference to their life. Okay, so that I think I'll conclude there, and during question and answers, yeah. Thank you.